as we discussed, Hegel tried to go beyond the limits that were put or that were set by his predecessor Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived in history. It was Immanuel Kant who divided between phenomenon and noumenon, or that which can be known and that which cannot be known. And according to Hegel, real is rational and rational is real. That means reality in its totality, the absolute, it evolves, and its evolution is a process that could be understood rationally, or it has got a rational design deep within it, which we call the Geist. Therefore, the whole scheme of worldly things, I mean, the history, the very development of human history must be seen as the development or the evolution of the world spirit. That's why he thought that the society must evolve into better clarity or the highest form of freedom, which he envisaged in the French Revolution, and especially in the person of Napoleon Bonaparte himself. Of course, it's debatable. Uh, Even after the period of Napoleon Bonaparte, there are so many movements that catapulted the human freedom into still higher or still greater heights, I would say. Anyway, as we discussed in the last class, either to agree or to disagree, Hegel was always a reference point in the post-Hegelian period, because the project that Hegel has undertaken, I mean, to produce or to present a rational scheme for the whole of reality, to present the whole of reality on a rational basis, it was either rejected by certain followers or it was well appreciated by some of his followers or the posterity. And one of the main criticisms that the posterity accused, or one of the most prevailing criticism that the posterity had on Hegel was that the individual existence or the individual importance was lost in the great scheme of things. Reality in its totality, where a human being, his individual identity is lost, because Hegel speaks about reality in its totality, where a single individual human being does not play a vital role in the evolution itself, in the evolution of the absolute. Of course, he does contribute to the evolution as a person, but anyway, he is not the author, he is not the master of that evolutionary process, because that evolution has got a rational design or a rational blueprint deep within it, which is called historicism. We discussed it, and therefore the individual choices, the individual preferences, they do not play a vital role in shaping the history or in molding the history. So that was the first criticism, or the foremost criticism leveled against Hegel. And you see, it is from this criticism that there evolved a philosophy that stood for the individual, that stood for the individual existence, I mean, the individual human existence, and the outcome of that resistance, the outcome of that protest was nothing other than existentialism. You see, that protest actually originated in Denmark. There was a famous Danish philosopher called Soren Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard was the main philosopher, or he was one of the leading figures who differed from Hegel, or who criticized Hegel on account of his uh, philosophy that does not recognize the individual importance or the importance of the individual in the evolution of the absolute. Therefore, the father of existentialism is Soren Kierkegaard, or Soren Kierkegaard is known as the father of existentialism. He lived only 42 years. He was born in 1813 and he died in 1855. But anyway, his existential philosophy could uh, prevail even in the 20th century. Even in the 20th century, he had great admirers, and the existential philosophy grew into its greatest heights in the 20th century through certain philosophers or writers like Franz Kafka, uh, then of course Samuel Beckett, then J.P. Sartre and Albert Camus. Of course, there are so many other philosophers, but the three main figures are, of course, Franz Kafka, J.P. Sartre, and Albert Camus. Kafka was of course, he was originally a German man, but he was born in Prague. In those days, it belonged to the Czechoslovakia, and then the Bohemian Germany, I would say, and then Sartre and Camus, both of them were from France. Anyway, its origin is in Denmark. Well, we will come to existentialism later. Before coming to existentialism, a great school of thought that originated after Hegel must be discussed, and that school of thought is nothing other than that of Nietzsche, or the Nietzschean philosophy, or the philosopher is Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. And you see, Nietzsche actually exerts influences even today through his great revolutionary ideas. And Nietzsche is perhaps one of the most uh, most influential uh, philosophers who shaped the contemporary world, the contemporary thinking. Anyway, he is often understood mistakenly, or he is often mistaken, because everybody says that he is an anarchist, or he promoted a licentious life and so on. But however, we have to delve deep into the academic contributions in relation with art, poetry, and literature. You see, the general scheme of Nietzsche's philosophy must be traced against the backdrop of the 19th century. You see, as Nietzsche was an adolescent, or he was when he was a young boy, or when he was a young man, uh, the book of Charles Darwin was published. It was in 1859 that Charles Darwin published his famous work on the origin of species by means of natural selection. It is through this book he revolutionized the anthropocentric, then existing anthropocentric worldview. Until that time, of course, quite a lot of revolutions took place in the second millennium. It came at first through Copernican revolution, where the people understood that we are not at the center of this universe. Earth is not at the center of the universe. If Earth is not at the center of the universe, then we cannot validly claim, or we cannot rightly claim that we are the measure of everything. Man is not at all the measure of everything. But still, he can claim, because still the people managed to believe that they were created in the image and likeness of God, because in Europe those days the greatest prevailing narrative was the biblical narrative about the origin of beings, the origin of human beings. Therefore, they believed that they were created in the image and likeness of God. If they were created in the image and likeness of God, then of course they do occupy a special place in this universe. And that pride, the pride that they were created in the image and likeness of God, is challenged by the evolution theory. According to the evolution theory, according to the new theory proposed by Charles Darwin, human beings are just some chance products, because it is through this publication Charles Darwin proposed that we are selected by nature. We don't select nature, but nature selects those organisms which have got the fittest characteristics. We don't select the nature. So it is not through our measurements that the world exists, but it is through the measurements of the world, through the measurements of the nature, that we exist. Only when we can cope with the measurements or the requirements put forward by nature. So it is only when we cope with the requirements put forward by nature that we can exist. So our survival depends upon the requirements put forward by nature. That's why nature selects those organisms which are displaying the fittest characteristics. It is not we who select nature, but nature selects the human beings. So it happens otherwise. So it's a great revolution, no? Therefore, through that revolution, through the revolution of evolution theory, the human position was challenged. Human beings are considered no more at the center of the universe. So this is what is happening in the second half of the 20th century. And you see, as a young man, Nietzsche was highly influenced by this literature. And of course, in that theory, according to the evolution theory, when we get deep into the theory, then we will understand that not the mightiest organisms that survive. It is not the mightiest organisms that survive, but it is the most flexible organisms that survive. So survival is not necessarily connected with power. It is not necessarily connected with power. It is connected with the adaptability. The term he uses is adaptability or flexibility. Of course, in order to display flexibility, we must have power as well. But it is not the mere power that counts. So the compendium of power, flexibility, then of course certain other things is called the adaptability. And the most adaptable species or the most adaptable organisms or individuals would survive. So nature selects those organisms which have got the fittest characteristics. So therefore, in order to become fit in this universe, you must have flexibility. That's what he proposes. Well, then Nietzsche thought about, or Nietzsche was quite familiar with this theory of evolution, and then he thought that power makes, of course, or power counts a lot in the flexibility. Power is an indispensable element in making an organism the fittest or flexible. Therefore, he developed a power, philosophy of power. When he develops the philosophy of power, he always connects it with his predecessor or one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived in Germany, Arthur Schopenhauer. Because it is Arthur Schopenhauer who developed a new theory of the will. You see, the theory is very simple. According to Arthur Schopenhauer, of course, he also didn't agree fully with Immanuel Kant, even though he had great admiration for Immanuel Kant and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He never agreed fully with both Kant and Hegel. He would say that the governing principles of this world must be divided into two, because the world is governed by, the physical world is governed by only one principle, or all other principles can be categorized together and they could be put under one category. For example, for Immanuel Kant, there were 12 categories, and together with 12 categories, there were space and time as the forms of intuition. But Schopenhauer would say, no, we don't need so much categories. We can explain the physical world with the help of one super category, and that category is cause and effect. Because in the material world, everything is conditioned. Every effect or every occurrence, every happening is conditioned by a cause. Therefore, with the help of cause and effect, when there is a preceding thing or when there is an antecedent, then of course the consequent would definitely follow. Therefore, with the help of this relationship between the antecedent and consequent, with the reciprocation between cause and effect, we can explain the physical world. So the physical world can be by and large explained by cause and effect chain. So the physical world is governed by cause and effect. So we need only one category to explain the physical world. For example, you see, when an animal is hungry, of course that animal would uh, it would feast on or it would prey on another smaller animal, and then it will definitely uh, extinguish its hunger. So in order to survive, they have got such a mechanism to prey on or to feast on the smaller animal. And therefore, when hunger comes as the antecedent, then the hunting comes as the consequent. So they do not have any other choice. If they are hungry, they would definitely hunt down other smaller animals. That's sure. So the physical world is governed by cause and effect, according to Arthur Schopenhauer. But he would say, but human beings are a bit different. They are not blindly governed by cause and effect. Sometimes the human beings can go beyond, and at times they go beyond the cause and effect. Of course, if we are hungry, we would also wish to eat something, of course. But at the same time, sometimes we can forego our hunger. We can choose not to eat. We can choose fasting. Such a choice is not found in the natural world. I mean, in the animal world, or in the subhuman world. Of course, I do use the term subhuman world. In the subhuman world, you don't find such choices because they don't have such choice. Once the antecedent is there, then the consequent will definitely follow. But as far as we are concerned, as human beings, we can choose not to eat. We can choose to fast. So despite being hungry, we can choose to fast. So we are not causally connected with the antecedent. Our actions are not causally connected with another physical thing. No physical thing necessitates our actions. So the human actions are not necessitated by any physical thing, any antecedent. Therefore, the element that differentiates human being from the other animals or from the subhuman world is called will. We have got choice. We have got a will. That's why Schopenhauer would write his famous book with the title "The World as Will and Idea," or even it is even translated as "World as Will and Representation." Anyway, will and idea. That means actually he is again going back indirectly to Descartes. It is Descartes who famously said that there are two substances, mind and matter. Mind is entirely different from matter. So in the same way, Schopenhauer is also saying that there is matter and the material world, and the material world is governed by the cause effect relationship, whereas there is another realm, or there is another phase that escapes the causal connection or the cause effect nexus found in the physical world, and that realm or that phase is called the human phase or the human realm or the realm of will and idea, which is not immaterial. So actually, he is also indirectly going back to the philosophy of Descartes. He is also going back to the Cartesian dualism, that the reality is categorized into two, as two substances, mind and matter. Even though he doesn't explicitly say about mind, he speaks about idea or representation and will. And he would say that it is with the will that we overcome the physical world. So the will has got the power to overcome the physical world. So when I am hungry, my body demands food, or the physical world, or my physic. Our body is also called the physic, no? So my physic demands food. So the demands of the material realm in me, the demands of the material part of me are overcome by the part called will. So my will has got the ability to overcome the material part. Therefore, will is able to overcome matter. That's why he has got the famous title, The World as Will and Representation. So the physical world is governed, or the physical world is dominated by will, which is above the nexus of cause and effect. And therefore, will is a power. So will is to be seen as a great power. And when he's asked, if he's asked, what is that will striving for? Then he would say that will is striving for life. Therefore, he calls the will to life. This will is always a will to life uh, according to Schopenhauer. And you see, Nietzsche had very much informations. He had collected a lot of informations from the history of philosophy, and of course, he was very familiar with the German philosophers uh, before him, especially Kant, Hegel, Fichte, Schelling, and Schopenhauer. So he had a great admiration for Schopenhauer. Therefore, he took the concept of will from Schopenhauer, but he made it a bit different. He explained, in order to utilize that concept of will in his philosophy, he made he attempted a reshaping or a facelifting, and that facelifted philosophy is seen in his will to power. So the will is will to life in Schopenhauer, whereas it is will to power in Nietzsche. Anyway, Nietzsche also considered will as a force, and such philosophies are called the philosophies where will is considered as a force is called such philosophies are called life force philosophy. They are called life force philosophy, and therefore he would say that the fundamental force in this material world, the fundamental governing force that determines or shapes the material world is the will to power. Therefore, will to power must be seen as the fundamental force existing in this world. You see, in order to make us in order to make us flexible or adaptable, we must also have a power. And he takes the concept of Charles Darwin together with that of Arthur Schopenhauer, and therefore he would say that we are evolving and we are selected by nature, of course, according to the Darwinian theory, but at the same time we have got the will, and through that will we are actually trying to exert power and to acquire power. So if you ask me what is the real meaning of will to power, is it the will to acquire power or to display power or to exert power, then I would say both are included in the will to power. So through the will to power, you are making yourself, or you are asserting your existence in this world, and you are making yourself adaptable. You are making yourself the the best choice of this nature. So in order to make you the best choice of this universe, you will have to stick to power. So only when you are powerful, you will be selected by nature. So even to get a selection, even to be selected by nature, you have to display power and you have to acquire power. For example, Nietzsche actually takes lessons from nature. He would say that in the nature, to be powerless means to perish. Without being powerful, you will just perish. So therefore, In order not to perish, you will have to choose power. Therefore, he concluded that the fundamental force existing in this world, the fundamental principle governing the human actions, is will to power. That's why he has got will to power as the core theme of his philosophy. Then, anyway, you might have heard about his concept of will to power, but we are not much concerned about his concept of will to power. On the other hand, we are concerned with his concept of art and architecture, and of course, that of literature. You see, Nietzsche has developed a, I would say, an original theory of art, and that is what we are going to see right now. So, actually, Nietzsche has written a famous work, The Birth of Tragedy. And in his Birth of Tragedy, he actually discusses about the most important, or the two important elements that prevailed in Greek art and literature. They are the Apollonian and the Dionysian elements. For example, Nietzsche was a philologist. Basically, he was a philologist, but at the same time, he had great admiration for the Greek culture, and because of that Greek culture, he tried to understand the real meaning of Greek tragedy and Greek art. And of course, he also studied the history of Greek art, architecture, and poetry. And therefore, towards the end of that study, he would publish the book, The Birth of Tragedy. And you see, in The Birth of Tragedy, he makes an analysis of art and literature in connection with his philosophy of will to power, or his life force philosophy. And how do we connect it with his life force philosophy? That's what we are going to see right now. See, as far as Nietzsche is concerned, Nietzsche was a great admirer of Greek culture. I told you that. And you see, while discussing Saint Augustine, I told you one thing. The Roman people were not happy with the introduction of a new religion to the masculine, the virile Roman culture. As far as the Romans were concerned, they were having a very high opinion about their religion, their gods. For them, the gods like Jupiter, the gods like Minerva or Neptune or Athena, and so on, all the Roman or the Greco-Roman gods of, you see, all the Greek gods had their counterparts in the Roman culture. So the Roman mythology is actually an extension of the Greek mythology. So therefore, sometimes I would also use the terms interchangeably. Anyway, in the Roman culture, they had warlords and warlike gods. And when they had such powerful gods, when they had that virility or masculinity in the divine concepts, of course, Rome was indomitable. Rome was always victorious. And with the introduction of a new culture, of a new religion, which practiced humility as the best virtue, meekness as the best virtue, and a religion that preached a God who died helplessly, hopelessly, powerlessly, then of course the Roman people were not happy. They would say that we don't need such gods. In order to remain powerful in this world, our empire needs gods like Jupiter. We need gods like Neptune, not some powerless gods like Jesus Christ. So that was the accusation that the Roman people, or the great Roman admirers, had put forward against, or they had placed against Christianity. And it was Saint Augustine who gave the answer to that criticism, or he could successfully respond to those criticisms, and we discussed it in The City of God and the concept of historicism. In the same way, Nietzsche is also making another attack. So actually the Roman people were saying that the classical Greco-Roman culture is dead with the introduction of Christianity. So Christianity has actually done a great crime with the birth of Christianity. The classical Greek culture committed suicide. So Christianity is the root cause of the death of the classical Greek culture, according to the criticisms we find in De Civitate Dei of Saint Augustine. And the same thing is repeated by Nietzsche. Nietzsche also says that the classical Greek culture was, of course, a great culture. And in that culture, they had the they had all the expressions of human feelings. The human beings were actually capable of expressing all their feelings, and they could find the human suffering, the human enjoyment, and all the uh, expressions of life in their drama, in their art, in their poetry, and so on. But all these things gave way to certain decadence through the introduction of the Socratic philosophy and through the introduction of Christianity. Therefore, he would say that two persons have done great damage to the classical Greek culture. One is Socrates, and the second one is Jesus Christ. That's why he is always preparing his cannons against all. He is always ready to fire his cannonballs against both Socrates and Jesus Christ. Wherever he happens to get a chance, he would criticize Socrates and Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ and Socrates, they are the arch enemies of Nietzsche's philosophy and Nietzsche himself. Of course, but it was a theoretical attack. And what was the reason behind it, we would come across it later, or towards the end of this class. Well, so Nietzsche would say that in the Greek culture, for example, today, when we have got a drama or an artistic representation of the human experience, then we would purposefully hide certain elements that are not fit for the stage, isn't it? For example, we are not we are not ready to represent everything, all the feelings and all the actions. For example, what we do behind the curtain and what we do on the stage, they are different. We cannot express all our feelings on the stage, all our actions. We cannot represent all our, we cannot express and we cannot represent all the actions and feelings of human beings on the stage. On the other hand, the classical Greek thinkers, the classical Greek writers and playwrights, and of course the artists, they were ready and they were courageous enough to represent life in its fullest sense. All the expressions of life were portrayed in an artistic way. For example, you might have heard about the famous story of the god Pan, who is seen as engaging in bestiality, You see, and from Herculaneum in South Italy, near to Pompeii, where during the time of the what we call the eruption of the Mount Vesuvius, the volcano Vesuvius in Pompeii, this Herculaneum, that city, the great culture of Herculaneum was demolished, or it was destroyed because of lava coming out of this volcanic eruption. And later, the historians or the archaeologists could find out certain sculptures depicting Pan god engaging in bestiality. Pan god is actually engaging in bestiality with a goat, and that statue was seen in the living room of a villa in Herculaneum. That means the people were not uh, they were not shameful to represent or to display an art form, a sculpture like that in their living room. That means they were so open and they were so advanced, because that's a kind of human feeling We are not supposed to, or we are not in a position to call it either an aberration or a normal feeling. You see, what is aberration and what is normal feeling? We are not in a position to judge. That was their feeling. So open was the Greco-Roman culture. That's why they could put such a sculpture in their living room. Actually, we would not, even in the 21st century, we would not do such things, or we would not display such art forms or the what we call sculptures in our living room. But 2 millennia back, the Greco-Roman people were so courageous and they were so open. So everything, all the feelings, no matter whether it is bestiality or homosexuality or even sexual feeling or even the normal sexual feeling, you see, and when we use the term normal, you see, they they had a special meaning for both normal and abnormal. Actually, they didn't differentiate between normal and abnormal in the way uh, we do it right now. Okay, anyway, so everything had a place in their art. That's why Nietzsche would say that there were two elements in the classical Greek culture. You see, there were two gods representing the two lines of thought, or two styles of feeling, or two kinds of feeling, I would say, and they were Apollo and Dionysius. Apollo and Dionysius, and it's the counterpart of Dionysius in Roman mythology or in Roman religion is Bacchus. That's why in the Roman culture also they had great feasts in place of Dionysius. So anyway, to be simple, there were two elements at least in the mainstream Greek culture. They were Apollonian and Dionysian. And what is the speciality of that? And what is the reason behind this division? You see, for example, today we all we all want to be law-abiding citizens. We all want to be systematic. We all want to be ordered. For example, in today's in modern Europe, or in today's Europe, even in contemporary Europe, when you reach a public space, or when you reach a theater, when you go to a concert hall, you will find discipline there. So discipline, order, all such things come from God Apollo. All these things come from the god Apollo. Whereas disorder, then wine drinking, and then chaos, and then what we call the carnal celebrations, and so on. All these things come from Dionysius. So Dionysius is actually the god of disorder, whereas Apollo is the god of order. Well, this is a rough distinction. Of course, we have got quite a lot of technical things connected with both Apollo and Dionysius. Anyway, Apollo is known as the god of order, the god of reasoning, then of course the god of harmony, and so on. Whereas Dionysius is known as the god of disorder or chaos, and the god of emotions. And instead of harmony, in Dionysius we find discord. So that is what we find in Dionysius. And Nietzsche would say that in the classical Greek culture, especially in Aeschylus and Sophocles, we had the great representation, or the great mixture, or a healthy mixture of the Apollonian and the Dionysian elements. For example, we have got certain wild fantasies even today, even in the 21st century. We have got certain wild fantasies, isn't it? I'm quite sure that you would agree with me, because I am free to have my fantasies, isn't it? So I have got certain wild fantasies. Sometimes it would be in connection with politics, or in connection with the moral life, and so on. Anyway, so we have got uh, wild fantasies, even though we don't express these wild fantasies, even though we don't strive to realize these wild fantasies, we do have wild fantasies. We have to admit that. So In the same way, the Greek people also had, like any other people, they also had wild fantasies. So, at least in a theater, they must find certain representations of these wild fantasies. So, a human being, his suffering, his enjoyment, and uh, his life per se, his life as such, must be expressed in an artistic way. That's what is called theater. So, an art should represent the life in its integrity with all the wild fantasies and so on. Therefore, only through that way we can successfully make an art, or we can successfully produce an artwork. Therefore, not only the Apollonian elements, but the Dionysian elements also should find, but the Dionysian elements should also find a space in artistic representations, in dramas. That's what he says. Therefore, he would say, today, in the modern world, everything is determined and governed by the Apollonian style, or the Apollonian spirit. For example, as I told you earlier, if you go to a concert hall in either in Sweden or in Germany or even in France, you will never hear a person murmuring something. No, it will be a pin drop silence. So we will be uh, what we call we would be very much surprised. For example, when we go from India to a concert hall in Sweden or in France or in Germany, then we would be very much surprised to see the silence there. Sometimes that silence would frighten us. So it's a kind of frightening silence. It's because of the order. For example, today, for a theatrical performance, they do presuppose order, they do presuppose harmony, they do presuppose reason. So the Apollonian elements are dominating the theater right now. Even today in our culture, for example, when when certain obscene things are represented in our films or dramas or any other art forms, actually uh, we are disturbed. We are not at home. We are not comfortable with such things. No, that's why the people protest either individually or as a group, either under the banner of the political party or under the banner of a religion. That's why we get disturbed by the introduction or the inculcation of chaotic or emotional or the obscene elements in art, because we are accustomed or we are tuned with the Apollonian culture. That's why we can never think beyond the Apollonian stage, beyond the Apollonian artistic representation. But Nietzsche would say that in the classical Greek culture, those who went to the theater, they had they had seen the full representation of human life, the representation of human life per se in their theaters. Therefore they had both Apollonian and the Dionysian elements. For example, sometimes we should be wild, sometimes we have to drink, sometimes we have to dance. So we need not only discipline, we need also enjoyment. So in order to enjoy, we must break the rules sometimes. So breaking the rules to enjoy and to have chaos, all these things are in our wild fantasies, and sometimes, at least in a theater, we must get the chance to enjoy these fantasies, or we must find a space where all these things are expressed. So the ideal stage, the ideal representation of human life is tragedy, where both Apollonian and Dionysian elements are blended in a perfect way. That is what is called tragedy in Nietzsche's concept. But Nietzsche would say that later this Dionysian elements, he would say that during the time of Sophocles and Aeschylus, of course, there was this tragedy. There was, of course, according to Nietzsche, in his Birth of Tragedy, he would say that before the birth of tragedy, the Greek art, architecture, and theater was plastic. It was mere plastic. But with the birth of tragedy, all the human feelings, the the human suffering, the human enjoyment, and everything could find a space in the theater. But and the greatest contribution to this kind of representation was made by two great literary figures. They were Sophocles and Aeschylus, according to Nietzsche. But later there came the drama of Euripides. Of course, Euripides was also a tragedian. He is one of the three greatest tragedians of uh, classical Greek poetry and literature. But anyway, with Euripides and with Socrates, you would say two persons are responsible for bringing the rational order into theatre, bringing the rational order into the normal life. So, two persons started dominating the human life or the Athenian life or the classical Greek life. And these two dominating figures were Euripides and Socrates. With them, there originated a culture of reason, a culture of ratiocination and rational representation of things. For them, a rational life is the best way of life. Even in the tragedies of Euripides, we would find certain pensive dialogues where the meaning of human life is expressed through certain rational statements, certain heavy statements, heavily rational statements, heavy duty rational statements. Such heavy duty rational statements, intellectual statements or intellectual dialogues are not found in Aeschylus or in Sophocles. Therefore, he makes a distinction between the, the classical Greek culture, which had perfectly blended both Apollonian and Dionysian culture, and the classical Greek world in which the Dionysian was subdued, or the Dionysian elements were engulfed by the Apollonian style. Nietzsche, the a perfect blend of the Apollonian and the Dionysian elements was the speciality of the Greek tragedy. So before the birth of tragedy, there was a kind of plastic art in the Greek culture also, but later it was replaced by the classical tragedy, where the Apollonian and Dionysian elements are perfectly blended. And you see, as you can see in the PPT, in the history, we would find the oscillation of the Apollonian and the Dionysian elements. In the classical age, you can see the classical age where the Apollonian elements, that means the age after Socrates, before the uh, classical age, before the Socratic and the age before the Socratic age and the age of Euripides, we had the archaic era where we had the Dionysian elements. So the Dionysian elements dominating. But in the classical age, again the Apollonian elements are dominating. But in the Middle Ages, we will find again the dominance of Dionysian elements. And in the Renaissance period, again we find the dominance of the Apollonian elements. Then in the age of exploration, you see the human spirit is liberated. Imbibing spirit from the classical culture, they wanted to go beyond the limits set by antiquity. That's why we spoke about non plus ultra. The difference between the non plus ultra and plus ultra. In the age of exploration, the motto was plus ultra, go beyond. So the limits, uh, the limits set by the classical culture, or the limits put by the set by the classical culture were overcome in the age of exploration. Therefore, we find a revival of the Dionysian culture in the age of exploration. But in the Victorian era, for example, Victorian era is very famous for the revival of the what we call the moral elements, and what we call the theatrical discipline, and so on. So in the Victorian era also, we will find the revival of discipline. And you see, Nietzsche is actually not trying to bringing back a kind of anarchy, but he is always represented as a philosopher of nihilism and anarchy. Actually, Nietzsche is not an anarchist. He is not a nihilist per se. On the other hand, according to him, both these elements should be present in artistic representation. For example, what we are really in our in our wild fantasies, in our dreams, what we are, they must also find a place, or they must also find a space in literature and artistic representation. So the artistic representation cannot blindly uh, deny the Dionysian elements. It cannot uh, blindly rule out the Dionysian elements, because the Dionysian elements are also a part of our personality and our personal and our human drives. Therefore, such elements also should find enough space or sufficient space in artistic representations. So the Victorian era actually neglected the Dionysian elements according to Nietzsche. Therefore, Nietzsche would say that following the patterns of the rational culture set apart by Socrates, and the culture of humility, meekness, and suffering put forward by Christianity, the Victorian era dominated the culture, then art, architecture, and literature through neglecting the Dionysian elements. And it is in this era Nietzsche criticizes the art, architecture, and literature. Therefore, Nietzsche's criticism of art, architecture, and literature must be seen against the backdrop of these oscillations. You see, in the classical Greek culture, we had actually a blend of Apollonian and Dionysian culture, and in the archaic era, of course, it was Dionysian, but in the legendary civilizations, of course, it was. So it starts with the legendary civilizations, and in the legendary civilizations, the Apollonian elements had the dominance. You see, therefore, Nietzsche would say that the perfect blend of these elements uh, should be uh, revived, and that is what is meant by Nietzsche's philosophy of art, architecture, and literature. So Nietzsche is not an anarchist. No, most of the commentators would say that Nietzsche is an anarchist and he is actually favoring the Dionysian elements. No, he is not exclusively favoring the Dionysian elements. He is actually favoring the Dionysian elements, but he is only saying that the Dionysian elements must find a sufficient space in our artistic representations. So a perfect blend of Apollonian and Dionysian elements must be there. Then you see the you see the Apollonian elements, for example, they are static, dreamlike, then pleasurable, ordered, historical, logical, and so on. Apollonian elements or the Apollonian characteristics are dreamlike, pleasurable, ordered, historical, logical, and static. While the Dionysian, it is termed as Dionysiac here, but anyway, ecstasy is there, then the suffering is there, then chaos is there, they are primordial, they are musical, and of course they are dynamic. So the dynamic elements of life, the painful elements of life, the chaotic elements of life, the primordial feelings of human person, and music. You see, in music we are actually enjoying the primordial elements of human life, and we are reaching a kind of ecstasy. So all these things must be perfectly blended according to Nietzsche. Therefore, Nietzsche would differentiate between gods, and you see, Apollo is placed there at the upper right quadrangle, and then you see there you will find Apollo as a formal god and a more centralized god. So Apollo is the formal and centralized part of the pantheon, or the abode of gods. And you see, Zeus is centralized, but he is less formal, whereas Athena is more formal but less centralized, whereas Dionysius is both less formal and less centralized. So the loose elements of life, the loose aspects of human life must have an artistic representation. Therefore, we must also take into consideration the Dionysian elements in our life and also in our artistic representation according to Nietzsche. That's why Nietzsche would say that now we have to, using the will to power, promoting the hidden energy in our human in our human life, unleashing the hidden energy in our human life, we will have to find new horizons. Therefore, Nietzsche would say that philosophy, he defines philosophy therefore as nithimur in vetitum. Therefore, I would say that it is not only valid for philosophy, it is also valid for art, architecture, and literature. Nithimur in vetitum means to strive for the forbidden. Well, let me write it down. Nithimur in vetitum. That is a Latin phrase, famous Latin statement he uses in his famous book Ecce Homo, Nithimur in vetitum. He defines philosophy as Nithimur in vetitum. That means to strive for the forbidden. Strive for the forbidden. To strive for the forbidden. So philosophy must be defined as the strive for the forbidden. Philosophy is striving for the forbidden. Until now, certain things were forbidden. For example, the chaotic elements in our life, the chaotic fantasies in our life, the wild fantasies in our life, all these things were forbidden, either in artistic representation or in the social space. In our social life, we are not supposed to express our wild fantasies and expressions. All these things were forbidden. Now, through an organic philosophy, through a healthy philosophy, we have to strive for the forbidden. Therefore, for him, the real definition of philosophy is striving for the forbidden. And who forbade it? That's the next question. Who forbade it? Of course, Socrates was the first person whose influence effected in the declining of the Dionysian elements, because he promoted rational life. For him, knowledge was a virtue, and knowledge was the highest virtue. So a kind of acquiring knowledge or rational life was the highest virtue for him, not the real celebration of life. So he forbade people from celebrating life per se, life in its crude form. Instead, he promoted a rational life. Therefore, Socrates was the first person. Then, secondly, it was Jesus Christ. It was with the birth of Christianity, it was with the birth of Jesus himself. Of course, he would say, Nietzsche would say that this culture of decadence, this culture of foregoing and sidelining the Dionysian elements, it originated with the birth of Jesus. That's why in his famous work Antichrist, that book ends, of course, it has got 62 paragraphs, and in the 62nd paragraph, he uses a term, dies nefastus. He would say that we all celebrate the birth of Jesus as the day, of course, that's called Christmas. The day of the birth of Jesus is celebrated worldwide, and we do say that a new culture was inaugurated on that day, or it is said that with the birth of Jesus Christ, a new culture was introduced into the world, the culture of charity, the culture of love, the culture of altruism, the culture of kenosis, I mean the self-giving and so on. All these things are promoted by the Christian culture, of course. Therefore, we would say that with Jesus Christ, there was born a new culture, culture of charity, culture of humility, culture of meekness, and so on. But he would say that it is actually not the birth of a new culture, actually it is the death of the Dionysian culture, because through Socrates and Jesus Christ there was introduced to this world the death of the classical Dionysian culture. The Dionysian elements are two persons are responsible for sidelining the Dionysian culture, and they are considered in the rational world, in the philosophical world. Socrates is just like a god, he is god-like, and for the Christian religion Jesus Christ is God. Therefore now such a god must be dead. A god who sidelined the Dionysian elements of life must be dead. Therefore, Nietzsche speaks about the death of God. Therefore, for Nietzsche, the death of God is not the death of God in a pure atheistic way. No. Normally, we do call Nietzsche as an atheist, and we don't understand rightly the meaning of the death of God. For Nietzsche, death of God means death of a god who sidelined the Dionysian culture. So, in order to revive, in order to re-establish the Dionysian culture, the gods who established the classical culture, the Victorian, of course, Jesus is not, or Jesus or Socrates, they are not responsible for the establishment of Victorian era because it is of the 19th century now. But still, it is through their influence the Apollonian culture reached its peak in Victorian age. Therefore, the death of such gods must be considered as necessary to re-establish, to revive the classical Greek culture or the classical blend of Apollonian and Dionysian elements. That's why Nietzsche speaks about the death of God. So when Nietzsche speaks about the death of God, it is not the mere death of God in a mere atheistic way. No, but he has got a cultural meaning and and an artistic meaning in his mind. Therefore, in order to revive the real tragedy, in order to revive the real art, in order to revive the real man in his full potential, we have to posit the death of God. That's why he would call the day of Christmas Dies Nefastus. That means the abominable day. He calls it Dies Nefastus. In the 62nd paragraph of Antichrist, he would call it Dies Nefastus. Dies, sorry, the spelling is wrong. Dies means day. Dies Nefastus. Yeah, it's right now. Dies Nefastus. That means the abominable day. Therefore, he calls Christmas the abominable day, and it is with the birth of Jesus there happened the death of classical Greco-Roman culture or the classical tragedy. Therefore, in order to revive the classical culture, the existing value system based upon or governed by the Socratic and Christian morality must be dead. So the Christian morality and the Socratic morality must be dead. It's a prerequisite for the re-establishment for the Dionysian culture or the classical Greek culture. Therefore, he would say that the present value system must be transvalued or it must be turned upside down. And that is what is meant by his famous term, Umbertum aller Werte. Umbertum aller Werte. Umbertum aller Werte. That means transvaluation of all values. Now we have to, he finishes his Antichrist with this famous statement, Umbertum aller Werte. That means transvaluation of all values. Now we have to start transvaluing the present value system, transvaluation of all values. Transvaluation of all values. Therefore, in art, in philosophy, in history, in literature, and everywhere, we need to try this transvaluation. We have to transvalue everything. So the existing value system must be turned upside down. It must be brought down in order to re-establish the classical Greek culture. That's why he uses the term transvaluation of all values. And he was, of course, as I told you, drawing inspiration from the evolution theory. He had a great fascination for power, because for him, in the nature, we don't find the survival of the powerless people or the powerless organisms. The powerless individuals would perish. Therefore, power is what matters. Anything that promotes power must be considered as good. That's why Nietzsche says that the feeling that power increases is the sole criterion for good. For example, when we divide between good and evil, for example, for Nietzsche, if we ask him what his ethics is, then he would say that when I have the feeling that my power increases, then I am good. When I feel that my power decreases, then it is evil for me. So good is nothing but the feeling of the increase of power, and evil is the feeling that the decrease, feeling of the decrease of power. It is the feeling that my power decreases. So anything that does damage to my power is an evil to me, and anything that promotes my power is good to me. That's why he would say that in the present system, for example, in the law system, or in the contemporary philosophy, or in the modern Victorian age, they don't promote power. For example, if you are powerful, you cannot do whatever you like. You will be curtailed by man-made laws, isn't it? So in the form of government, we have got a check and measure mechanism for power. No matter whether you are powerful or not, you have to abide by the law, isn't it? So law is functioning as a checking apparatus for power. So law is actually offering resistance to power. So the legal system, the government system, and everything, and even the morality, the present morality, all these things are offering resistance to full acquisition and the full realization of human potentials and power. Therefore, all these things must be turned upside down. The present legal system and the present governmental system and all these things must be turned upside down. You see, even then, we cannot call him a mere anarchist, because he is not a mere anarchist. On the other hand, he is actually making an analysis of the history of mankind. And he is anthropologically saying that the human beings have got certain deep tendencies that seek power. Therefore, that cannot be forgotten. That cannot be merely sidelined. We have to address to those faculties as well, and those aspirations as well. Therefore, he would say that we have to apply this transvaluation of all values to all the walks of human life. The whole uh, the whole human life must be analyzed with the help of, or it must be re-investigated with the light of transvaluation of all values. Therefore, he would say that the powerful people, the powerful human beings were always governing the world. But later, in order to check the the domination of the powerful people, the powerless people came together and they created state. They created law in order to survive, because the powerless people should also survive. So in order to guarantee their survival in a world that is governed by power, they need certain checking of power. They need some kind of resistance to power. Power must be chained. So by not chaining the power of the powerful people, they cannot survive. So they have to offer resistance to power. And in order to offer resistance to power, they constructed a new system, which is called the legal system, the government system, and so on. So even today, in almost all the governments, well, we call it justice or equity or something like that. But anyway, there the powerful people cannot grow into the fullness of their potentials. They cannot uh, they cannot find the fullness of their potentials in such a state. Therefore, he would say that the man-made concepts of good and evil, they must be they must be ruled out. So you have to live a life which is beyond good and evil. That's why we have got a famous title of his work, Beyond Good and Evil. So the man-made concepts of good and evil are governed by this powerlessness, because the powerless people are many while the powerful people are a few. Therefore, because of majority, the powerless people are dictating the way how a government should protect the powerless people. So they are actually offering resistance to power. Therefore, in order to live in an authentic way, one has to live beyond good and evil. So this is the famous statement by famous book by Nietzsche. This is the title of a famous book, Beyond Good and Evil. So in order to live in an authentic way, you have to live beyond good and evil. So the most authentic way of life is the life beyond good and evil. You need not care for the good and evil set by the average people, the powerless people. So today, you see, a classical example of such a philosophy is found also in the classical text of the Greek politician, cum thinker, Solon. Solon would say that law is just like a spider net. It is just like a web. For example, through with the help of a spider net or a web, we cannot catch any microorganisms. Can we? No, we cannot, because the microorganisms would escape through the uh, I mean through the parts of that, or through the webs. Through the webs they would escape. And you see, can we catch a human being with the help of a spider web? No, we can never, because we will break it. So it is neither meant for microorganisms nor meant for big organisms or huge organisms. Both the huge organisms and the microorganisms would definitely defy that system. So law is also the uh, just like the spider net or a web, or just like a fishing net. For example, a fishing net is not meant for uh, big whales. No, it is not meant for blue whales or big whales. No, we cannot catch a blue whale with the help of a net. And very small, minute uh, fishes, they cannot be caught by this fishing net either. Even such fishes would escape the fishing net while because they are very small. They are too small. So the too small, uh, what we call the too small fishes or too small organisms would always escape this system. So a system is meant for the system that we have in the present world is meant for the average people. Therefore, Nietzsche would say that in order to rise beyond the averageness, you will have to defy the system. You will have to defy the system. Only by defying the system, you can go beyond this system made for the average people. That's why he promotes a life beyond good and evil. You see, then he would say, as I told you earlier, he had a great fascination for the powerful people, and he would say that this world was earlier governed by a master morality, because the powerful people, they had always an appreciation for power, and a world or a system which is governed by a moral system which is governed by the powerful people is called the master morality. And later, in order to check the power of the powerful people, or in order to offer resistance to the power of the powerful people, they developed, or in the history they developed a kind of system that offered resistance to power, and that morality or that moral system is called the slave morality. That's why he would differentiate between the master morality and the slave morality. Master morality and slave morality. That's why, quite interestingly, he had great appreciation for the improvers of mankind. That's why he would say that there were quite a lot of improvers of mankind. Right now, Anjana teacher is asking me, can this be compared to the Indian Chanakya? You see, of course, I would say that Nietzsche had a great appreciation for the Indian system. He had a great appreciation for the Indian system, especially he was a fan of Manusmriti, and he in his Twilight of the Idols and also in Ecce Homo and to an extent also in Antichrist, he mentions the book Manusmriti. That's why he would say that the present system of morality, the present moral system, is an eternal revenge of the Chandala on the masters. That's why the Chandala people, for example, according to the classical Indian culture or according to the culture generated by or the culture envisaged by Manusmriti, the Chandalas are the powerless people. They were not powerful enough to govern the society, or they were marginalized people. No, so these marginalized people, they also they also waited for their chance, and finally they got their chance, and now they can take vengeance upon the upon their masters, because now it is the age of slave morality. So in the age of slave morality, the revenge of Chandala is eternal. Therefore Nietzsche would say that Chandala is taking vengeance upon his masters in an eternal way. So the eternal revenge of the Chandala. That's why he would say that this slave morality must be turned upside down. So the transvaluation of all values is not an exclusive concept that should be limited in art and literature or poetry, but also in morality, in government system, and everywhere. And you see, in when compared to the system of Chanakya, actually Chanakya, for example, he starts his book Arthashastra. He would also speak about the very concept of Malsya Nyaya. For example, he would say that the powerful beings or the powerful persons have got the tendency to engulf the powerless persons or powerless beings. For example, Malsinyaya means the logic of fishes. For example, in deep waters, a fish would always devour a fish which is another fish which is smaller to it, smaller than it. So the smaller fishes would be engulfed or they would be devoured by the greater fishes. So that is called the Malsya Nyaya. That means the logic of fishes. So in a world which is governed by power, everywhere the powerful would occupy the spaces, and the powerful would always kill and devour the powerless. Therefore, in order to resist that, in order to check that, Chanakya is proposing the so-called Dandanidhi. That's why he is actually speaking about Dandanidhi. Dandanidhi means the prevailing of justice or the legal system. We need a legal system in order to prevent this situation of the law of jungle or the law of the seas, I would say. So in order to prevent this Malsinaya, this logic of the fishes, we need Dandanidhi. That's why he speaks about Dandanidhi and Dandatharan. Dandatharan means one who one who executes this Dandanidhi. That's why in the very beginning of Chanakya's Arthashastra, Chanakya speaks about uh, this thing, of course. Anyway, Chanakya, therefore, teacher, I would say that Chanakya is not proposing the way of living in a dangerous way as proposed by Nietzsche, but anyway, he was quite in favor of bringing a legal system to offer a checking mechanism of the powerful people. Okay, fine. So as far as Nietzsche is concerned, Nietzsche would say that the present morality is a slave morality, and this slave morality must be turned upside down with the help of a new master morality. That's why Nietzsche always promotes the dangerous way of life. That's why he always says that we have to live dangerously. Live dangerously is a famous dictum by Nietzsche. So through transvaluation of all values, you have to live beyond good and evil. You have to overcome the the mediocre concepts of good and evil, the mediocre systems of present day morality, and you have to transvalue everything. You have to turn everything upside down. That's what he proposes. And you see, in that sense, Nietzsche has an eternal leverage, or Nietzsche's philosophy has got an eternal leverage on the art, architecture, and literature today. That's why, no matter whether it is in postmodernism or in any other kind of literary movement, we always see that the protest against the present system has its roots in Nietzsche's thoroughgoing criticism. That's why Nietzsche serves as the father of uh, all these protesting lines of art, architecture, and literature. Okay. Okay, fine. I think I can answer to the questions right now because we can continue later. Okay, a question from Mr. Vinod Kumar. When Nietzsche says that man-made laws should reign, does he mean that Bible is divine? Man-made, you see, actually, Nietzsche is having the opinion that the man-made laws are the laws made by the weaker part of the society. So the laws existing right now, the man-made legal system that we have at present is the result of the the laws made by the weaker part of the society, or the weaker quarter of the society, and they represent the majority. The majority of the people are weak, and they have made this law in order to survive, because without the protection of such a law they cannot survive. For example, you see, in Nidhi Saram there is a very famous statement. For example, the Indian system, sometimes the Indian system has got certain striking parallels with Nietzsche. For example, uh, uh, പക്ഷീണാം ബലം ആകാശം മത്സ്യാനാം ഉദകം ബലം ദുർബലസ്യ ബലം രാജ ബാലാനാം രോദനം ബലം. That's a famous statement in that's a famous slogan in Nidhi Saram. Pakshinam Beram Agasham. For the birds, the power is sky, and for the fishes, the power is, or their abode is, water. Malsyana Mudagam Balam. And Durbalasya Belam Raja. That means for the Durbalan, for the weak ones, their protection is by the king. That means they must have a powerful legal system to protect them. So in order to protect their rights, in order to protect their powerlessness, they have developed a legal system that always acts as a protective sheath. So Raja means, Raja or Rajava means the government. So the legal system. So the legal system is the protection for the powerless people. So the powerless people are becoming powerful with the introduction of a government, with the introduction of a legal system. So there must be a legal system to protect the powerless ones. That's why, for example, if you go through the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, he would speak about the origin of society there, where he would say that in the in the in the prehistoric era, the people were struggling like anything. They were fighting each other. That is what is called Homo homini lupus. That means man was a wolf to other man. I am a wolf to my neighbor, because if I am powerful, I would try to kill him. So this is the law of jungle, no? That is the famous statement. Uh, Homo homini lupus est. That means man is a wolf to other man. Homo homini lupus est. or he would say bellum omnium contra omnium. Bellum omnium contra. That means the bellum omnium contra omni means the war of all against all. Everybody is at war against other people. So such a situation must be somehow rectified. So in order to rectify such a system, the powerless people, they thought that if we permit the power of the powerful people to go unbridled, then our existence, our survival is at stake. Therefore, we will have to devise a new system where their power must be bridled. And in order to bridle their power, we have to develop a new system which is called society, and in order to make the society perennial, we will have to build up a new legal system. So actually the powerless people are making the laws for the survival. Therefore the man-made laws means the contribution, all the man-made laws are the contributions of the weaker part of the society, according to Nietzsche. Therefore Nietzsche would strictly speaking, he would never permit, or he would never encourage such a system. On the other hand, he would say that power should reign, or the stronger part of the society should reign. Okay. Yes, question from Mr. Vinod Kumar again. Chandalas are not backward people, but those commit sin, those who are expelled from Varna due to sin. Even a Brahmin becomes a Chandala when he sins. Of course, yeah, I do agree with you, Mr. Vinod Kumar, because in Nidhisara itself, we have got references to that concept, no? They would say that Jadi Chandala Shudraval. That means there are Jadi Chandala and Karma Chandala. Karma Chandala means those who become Chandalas through karmas, of course. Sasuyo Satyavak Cheva, Kradakno Dirka Vairavan, Chatvara Karma Chandala, Jadi Chandala Shudraval. So says Nidhisara. That means Sasuyo. Sasuyo means those who have got jealousy. Satyavak Chaiva. That means those who speak or those who say lies. Sasuyo Satyavak Chaiva, Kradakno Dirkha, those who are not thankful. Then Dirkha Vairavan, that means those who feel contempt for a long time. Sasuyo Satyavak Chaiva, Kradakno Dirkha Vairavan, Chatvara Karma Chandala. All these four categories belong to Karma Chandala. That means through their action they become Chandala. But at the same time, it also promotes Jadi Chandala Shudra. Shudra is Jadi Chandala. So of course, it's a debatable question. Anyway, this is how Nidhisaram says. Okay, good Vinod Kumar. But as far as Nietzsche is concerned, he is, of course, he is not very much familiar about the Indian system, perhaps, because he must not have he might not have read all the Indian literature, I think, because he was an expert in the Greek and the classical system. But anyway, he might have had an impression that the Indian system promoted a power ethics, especially Manusmriti might have promoted, according to Nietzsche, Manusmriti has promoted a power ethics. That's why he said it in his book. This is my impression about Nietzsche. Okay. Any other question? Yes. So could you please explain the term Übermensch? Is it related related to a way of life which exists beyond? Exactly. You see, actually, that's why I always encourage asking questions. For example, Übermensch is a very famous concept in Nietzsche's philosophy, which is translated into English as Overman or Superman. And normally, it is translated as Superman. But anyway, the real German term is Übermensch. Anyway, I congratulate Swati for bringing the the real or the original German term Übermensch. Übermensch means Superman. Anyway, I forgot to say about Übermensch. You see, for Nietzsche, the present man, the present human being is just a bridge. He is a bridge between animal and Superman. So when he utilizes or when he realizes the full potential that is deep within the human beings, when we lead a life according to power, then we have got the potential to become a being that is beyond the present human being. And he calls that ideal being Übermensch or Superman. Therefore, he would say that man is to be surpassed. Man is just a bridge between animal and Superman. So man is not the destiny. Man is not the end. Man is not the goal. Man is just a bridge. Man is just a way. So the human being should become something beyond the human being through power, through executing power and through acquiring power. Man has to become something beyond the present human being. Therefore, according to him, Übermensch is a man beyond the normal man, and of course, his life would be governed by a life beyond good and evil. Of course, for him, the pattern of life is or for him, the blueprint for life is a life beyond good and evil. And you see, something beyond good and evil. That statement has got uh, magical power. You see, even in Sartre, when he says that man has to constantly deny or man has to constantly negate the, the pre-given essences and so on. Actually, he is referring to Nietzsche, or he is indebted to Nietzsche, I would say. That's why I am saying, or I am repeating, that Nietzsche had exerted a great influence or a perennial influence on the 20th century philosophy and literature. Even today, no matter whether we call it postmodernism or any other ism or any other ology, Nietzsche had a perennial influence on the modern literature. And he still exerts great influence upon uh, people worldwide. But at the same time, his philosophy was also misused. As you know, this same philosophy created Adolf Hitler in Germany. You see, Adolf Hitler, he he thought of uh, he thought of a powerful race. That's why he said that we are the most powerful race and we do not have enough space. That's why he has made the famous dictum Rasse und Raum, race and space. So the German race, the Aryan race is the best race. Therefore, we need enough space and we don't find enough space in Germany. Therefore, we have got imperial wishes. We have to enlarge our empire. We have to create a new Aryan empire, uh, or a pan-German, pan-Aryan empire. That's why he wanted to uh, produce quite a lot of good Aryans. That's why he had Lebensborn. Then of course he had uh, Ordensburgs. That means the training centers for the Nazi people, the future Nazi people. And in order to give birth to healthy Aryan children, he had even certain mating centers. Can you believe that? Sometimes facts are stranger than fiction. You see, perhaps you can see such a thing in my. See, this is Ordensburg in Vogelsang in the German-Belgian border, and after the Second World War, it was used as a Belgian barrack, and a couple of years back, they opened it for the public in Germany. It is actually in the German-Belgian border, and in 2016, or in I think it was in 2017, I was lucky to visit this Ordensburg in Vogelsang. So this was a training center for the future Nazis. You see, the intellectual training center for the future Nazis. So these are the photographs. Of course, these are file pictures, and this is a photograph of Vogelsang with me in the picture. You can see me there. You see, so sometimes the facts are stranger than fiction. So it can happen everywhere. So such philosophies can sometimes be very detrimental to the humankind. So it's up to the people who manipulate such philosophies. No, that's all. Okay. Any other question?
No, Father, I couldn't see any more questions.
Okay.
Father, do you think Nietzsche, who is right, Nietzsche, or would you side with Socrates or Nietzsche
Yes.
personally?
You see, personally, I would always side with Socrates because you see, uh, even according to the you see the human beings. For example, as I told you the last day, this book, The Humankind, A Hopeful History. You see, in the literature of Yuval Noah Harari and also in the literature of Richard Dawkins, they do speak about human beings are as fundamentally selfish. But at the same time, the human beings are also fundamentally altruistic or cooperative. For example, the human beings are defined as social animals, no? So we need society and we are fundamentally or genetically gregarious. I would say that with the development of course, the development of language is a historical thing. The language developed, as Harari says, the cognitive revolution which took place some 70,000 years ago has contributed to the development of language. But with the development of language, now we can form nations, we can form currencies, we can form religions, and so on. So, no matter whatever we form, we have got always this gregarious nature. Without society, we cannot live. And you see, this society has its firm foundation on altruism and help. So it is not the survival of the fittest that governs a society, but the care for the unfit. It is not the mere survival of the fittest that governs the society, but the care for the unfit. Because in a society, we will have to care for the unfit people. And that care for the unfit is a very fundamental, or that's the most fundamental theme in a society, and we cannot just ignore it. We cannot merely ignore it. We can never. And that's the great fault of Nietzsche, and that's the fault I find with Nietzsche. And for me, therefore, knowledge and every human enterprise must be open for this societal dimension of human beings. So the societal dimension of human beings must be taken into account, and then there the fundamental force is the care for the unfit and cooperation. So this man, Rutger Bregman, who has become a sensation recently, he also speaks about this thing.
Excuse me, Father. I'm
Yeah,
Sister Lena.
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much for this informative session. I think now our knowledge is turning upside down. And I want to ask you one thing. We have already discussed about the anthropocentric worldview,
Mm-hmm.
especially regarding with in the 17th century Cartesian viewpoints.
Yeah.
And again, we can see another viewpoints regarding the anthropocentric worldview when it comes to Nietzsche and other philosophers. And now we are here in 21st century. And again,
Mm-hmm.
we are discussing about the anthropocentric. We are living in an era of anthropocentrism. So, is there any differences between these anthropocentric worldviews, or more than that, is there any similarities between these things? Can you
You
explain
see,
that?
you see, the anthropocentrism is seen as the governing principle or as the dominant principle in almost all worldviews. Even now, even when we speak about deep ecology today, for example, today we do speak about deep ecology, where we don't find any special space for human beings in an ecosystem. For example, as far as the human beings are concerned, we are not superior. We are not entitled to any superiority in this universe. That's what is promoted or proposed by deep ecology. But you see, even in such systems, we have got anthropocentrism in a what we call in discourse. We have got anthropocentrism in discourse in all the current worldviews, no matter how we develop it. Sometimes apparently it would be against anthropocentrism. For example, today we do say that the human beings, we don't occupy any special we don't have any special privilege, or we don't occupy any special space in this universe. All other organisms and animals and the nature is like us. But anyway, we will promote anthropocentrism in many ways, and that's what is happening today. You see, for example, uh, I am Nija Parovedi Gananam Lekuchedasam Udara Charitanam to Vasudhaiva Kudumbagam. That's what we find in Maha Upanishad. You know, for the enlightened people, Udara Charitanam, the world is just like a family. Vasudhaiva Kudumbagam. The whole earth is a family. But anyway, of course, as a slogan we can recite it, but at the same time, how do we fare in this world? We are always driven by anthropocentrism. And this anthropocentrism has got certain reformed and refined ways. And it is not only anthropocentric, it is also phallocentric. So those who have got power, those who can deliberate, those who can govern, they will have their own narratives. Sometimes they would say that no, we don't promote any anthropocentrism, but actually our world is anthropocentric. For example, even today in the fight against corona, actually, are we endorsed to fight against corona? Corona is just like another, just like us. No, corona is also an organism, just like human beings. The modern man, including you and me, we are Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens is just one among 8 million species. And coronavirus, COVID-19, is also one species. And are we superior to the coronavirus? In our fight against the coronavirus, we also, for example, a religious man would pray to God that let me be victorious. Please allow me to be victorious against this coronavirus. Or in the modern science, all the scientists and the doctors, they are trying to find out a vaccine against corona. Actually, with whom should the nature stand? With corona or with human beings? Or is it apathetic? Is it amoral? Is it neutral? Nature is just like a neutral umpire. Nature cannot take a stand against the human beings. But at the same time, in every newspapers, no matter whatever newspaper you have, no matter whatever literature you read now, you will always hear the word, we are at a war footing against an evil. What kind of evil? The virus. Is the virus an evil? For the virus, it is trying to survive. For the virus, it's a matter of survival. For us, the human beings, also, it's a matter of survival. And for nature, nature does not care for it. For example, nature has lost quite a lot of organisms in its long run. Quite a lot of species became extinct. And sometimes, for example, if the whole human species, Homo sapiens, if we become extinct upon this planet, would this planet move on? It would move on. It would continue to exist with the remaining organisms. And sometimes a better organism, an organism better than the present human beings, may evolve. There is possibility. So the nature is neutral, quite neutral. But we are making, in our literature, in our science, and in everything, in every discourse, we are making this world anthropocentric. That's why we do use the term, we are at a war footing against coronavirus. Actually, we are not supposed to wage war against another organism. Of course, it's quite ideal. You should not brand me as an anti Homo sapiens hardliner. No, I am not such a hardliner. But anyway, just to bring to your notice the structure of the narratives that are created even today. That's what I wanted to bring to your notice. Okay, fine. I think I'm clear.
Okay, Father. Thank you.
You see, Sridevi ma'am is asking Vinod Kumar is asking a question. What was the criteria for Nietzsche to select Socrates and Jesus from history? You see, for example, it is Socrates who, uh, it was Socrates who fought famously against the sophists. For the sophists, the whole meaning of life or the sole meaning of life and reason was to survive. For them, reason was another utensil, or reason was, or knowledge was another extension of the uh, what we call the capacities for survival. So in order to survive, in order to earn livelihood, you have to use your knowledge. If you cannot do physical work, and if you are endowed with intellectual abilities, then you have to use your intellectual abilities to earn livelihood. Therefore, knowledge was considered as a matter of earning livelihood. That's why Socrates would say that no, he would say that knowledge is not for livelihood. Knowledge is not to make you powerful. Knowledge is not meant for survival. Knowledge is a virtue in itself. Knowledge is an end in itself. If something is an end in itself, it's a virtue. Therefore, every action should seek knowledge, because knowledge is the highest end. It's the virtue. Therefore, in your life, in your activities and so on, you have to seek knowledge. Therefore, knowledge was promoted and projected as the highest ideal. Therefore, the power didn't find any space in such a rational life. Then you see the instinctive life did not find any space in in such a world. Therefore, in all the artistic representations, knowledge became the highest ideal, the highest virtue. So knowledge was represented as the highest ideal, and it was due to Socrates. And later, humility, or what we call meekness, or the altruistic love, self-giving love, self-negating love, all these things became ideals with the introduction of a powerless God who died on cross, Jesus Christ. Therefore, he would say that with the help of these two figures, or these two figures, have historical figures, have contributed to the decline of the classical Greco-Roman culture. Okay, am I clear, Vinod Kumar? Yeah. Father, Anjana Ma'am is asking a question. Father, you spoke of life force. In Bernard Shaw's play, Saint John, he speaks of Joan as an agent of life force. That's why she could lead the French to victory. What does uh, show mean? You see, that's a very good question. That's a very intelligent question, teacher. You see, actually, I wanted to speak also about Bernard Shaw, because Bernard Shaw is one of the greatest uh, thinkers and literary figures who promoted the philosophy of life force. And the drama par excellence uh, in dealing with life force is his Man and Superman, especially the third act of Man and Superman, Saint John in Don Juan in Hell. Don Juan in Hell is an excellent uh, piece of literature as far as life force, philosophy of life force is concerned. But anyway, in Saint John also he speaks about life force, especially through Saint John. You are absolutely right. You see, the life force means the force that moves the beings forward. Actually, life force is nothing but the force, or the what we call, it is called élan vital. In French, it is called élan vital. That means the vital force, the vital force that moves individuals and societies forward. And you see, Saint Joan is also a leading figure in the French army, even though she could not take part in the war in a very official way. She was very instrumental, or she was quite instrumental in bringing the British down. For example, as we know, between 1337 and 1453, for 116 years, France and Britain fought against each other, which is known as the Hundred Years' War. And Saint John's role was very pivotal in bringing the British down. And then for her, the even though she said that it was inspiration, for her the inspiration came from within. Sometimes the country has given her, or the patriotism has given her this force. So the life force is the motto for life, the reason for life, I would say. Raison d'être. There's a famous term, no? Raison d'être. So it was the raison d'être for her. Raison d'être. So the raison d'être for her. It was the raison d'être for Saint John. So in that sense, she could actually, what we call, she could motivate the French people, and it was because of her motivating the the French people, that the English people found fault with her and they accused her of witchcraft, or what we call the evil influence, and she was burnt alive at stake in ruin, no? In ruin, no? Yes. So the raison d'être, and the motivation she gave to the French people. In that sense, we have to understand the life force, as far as I understand Benoit. You see, Benoit is also one of my favorite writers, and I am a big fan of Benoit. Yes.
Hello, Father. There
Yeah.
is one more question from Mr. Vinod Kumar.
Yeah.
Does niche mean lawlessness by power?
Actually, he does not mean lawlessness. That's why I told you that it is not mere anarchy that Nietzsche means. For him, the the Dionysian elements, the elements to the aspirations, the Dionysian aspirations, the what we call the 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 Dionysian dreamings, or even what we call our own longing for power, all these things should find their expression in literature and uh, everyday life. That's all what he meant. Honestly speaking, that's all what he meant. But in order to, you see, no revolutionary would advocate what we call a mediocre course. When revolution comes, it comes torrentially, no? So in the same way, the philosophical literature through which he promoted the revolution, it was torrential. That's why he has used certain extreme terms, because only through extreme terms a revolution can take place. That's my impression about Nietzsche, because I have read quite a lot of Nietzschean literature, I would say extensively, but that's my impression. Of course, I have never gone through the whole literature of Nietzsche. There are certain pieces of literature that escaped me, but anyway, in the mainstream literature of Nietzsche, I do find that he was not promoting anarchy. No, he was not promoting anarchy per se.